Hello and welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Leora Brecher. Hey, Laura, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Leora.
Hi.
I want to make sure I get that correctly. So I'd like to start our conversation with some images of yours, of your work. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. So I chose a couple of pieces, things that I thought were the most fascinating. And so this piece, I love this piece. I actually wish I was in the room so I could kind of walk around it and see it. Can you tell me a little bit about this
I am
particular?
so happy you chose this piece. It is the one of the newest pieces.
Is it?
Yes, it was in my last show at Muse before I left Muse. But it's very different than my earlier work.
Mhm.
Um, and um, I love this piece.
What's the material? What's it made out of?
It's low fire earthenware.
Hmm. I had my
And
suspicions.
yeah, and it's pit fired bottom pieces.
Hmm.
Um, I made this piece after I took a sculpture class at Grounds for Sculpture,
Hmm.
and these pieces are solid, which is very, in clay, you're not usually doing that, but that's why I kept them even and thin so that they could fire. But I love the idea of extraction instead of building up.
Hmm.
After years of making things coil by coil, everything
Right.
is hollow, all this. I love the idea of starting with a lump of clay and just taking away and seeing where that would go.
Uh,
So
When
I
I
love
s-
the process of it.
when I first saw this, and maybe I'm reading into this, are you inspired by the figure at all?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I
Um,
see two figures here.
yes. Well, I was about to say the other part of it, other than the technical part, is that I loved the one, they are very figurative, but also the relationship between them.
Hmm.
They're talking to each other. They're in relation with each other.
Hmm.
And that is one of the newer series that I'm in the midst of right now. They're working with the white clay, but adding the smoke element as technical part and also doing much more relationship kind of and figurative, which I came from more of a nature-based
Hmm.
kind of series before.
As soon as I saw this with the figures, my mind jumped to Henry Moore in the way that he can make multiple pieces that talk to each other, that have that sort of relationship. That's what I saw. But I really love, for me, it was the idea of this head as an open vessel. I thought that was, it made me smile. It made me laugh. Like, oh, that's an interesting take on that.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's hardly been out in the world.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a series that I'm just loving because it's so open-ended.
Yeah, somebody needs to snatch that up. That should be in somebody's collection.
Well, it's sitting on the table in my studio at the moment.
Okay, not for long, hopefully.
No.
So the other thing I liked about your work, this is going to sound strange, but it has a very dreamlike quality. That's what I kind of see and get at because I know you're not necessarily planning these out in your head and then making them, right?
No.
It's a process of invention as you go.
Absolutely. This is one of my earliest works.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, it's and it is a piece that I'll never sell. It's in my living room. Um,
And again, the materials of this,
this is also a low fire earthenware.
is that what you mostly work in?
It is for like 10 years I worked in porcelain throne and carved sections out of that I glazed.
Mhm.
Then I spent a good 10 years, 15 years working in low fire red clay, which I smoked, and that was all coiled.
Mhm.
And then I moved into white clay and just pure white for years and years.
Is
Um,
the inside of this, does it have a glaze on it or is it also white?
no, it's also white, it's just the shadow.
All right. It's a
So
beautiful form. I mean, it's very, wasp nest like. There's not really any other way I could put that. But it is, the shape is just wonderful. Again, another piece that I would love to, here's another one that I would love to actually be in the room with and walk around. So where does this sit in your oeuvre? Is this early or late?
This is after the piece before, which there when I was working with the coils, it was little pieces of coils, little
Mhm.
bits of coils, and I was creating gentle shadows, and I was much more focused on just the texture of it
Mhm.
and the shape. Just
Mhm.
and it literally just grew. That's why I love working with coils because you can just let them organically grow and see where they go.
Yeah, this particular shape, is this something that you just invent as a one-off, or are you developing these shapes and then reusing them in other pieces as well?
Um, the shapes themselves, no. The technique, yes. I mean, I've done a series of these in different sizes and variations. Some of them are really big and fat, and some of them are tall and skinny. But the whole idea with this, and this was the beginning of when I started using coil as line,
Mhm.
coil as movement,
Mhm.
and coil as shadow. So it's sort of like trying to capture movement and sort of freeze frame it kind of so
Mhm.
that you get the sense of this. This is what I call like my it was my early whirlwind series.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. So this one, excuse the photo is not the greatest, but I loved again these shapes, this sort of nesting of these sort of two objects. It
Well,
worked.
that's what it's called. It's my nesting series.
There you go. And
And
what is,
this is
I can
kind of
imagine,
the way.
is that a white clay or is it a porcelain?
No, it's a white clay, different than the earlier white clay that in the other pieces. I went to NCECA, the conference here for the National Clay Conference, and I found from Asheville, North Carolina, a white clay that looks like porcelain.
Mm.
It is so white.
Oh, nice.
And I sort of order like 500 pounds every couple of years.
I
We were
hope you
in
love it.
Nashville and I picked up some, like 6 boxes and brought them back with me.
Yeah.
So that's why people think of this specifically now that I've been using this new clay, that it is porcelain.
Mhm.
And it feels like porcelain in that it's so smooth, but it works better. It doesn't have the problems that porcelain has in terms of memory and things like that.
Well, I can imagine that, when you find a new product like that, that you would just
Oh,
want,
a game changer. It was,
yeah, right.
it was really because I missed the whiteness of porcelain. I didn't miss the translucency as much for what
Mhm.
I wanted to do. Um, though I'm starting a new series where I might go back and use some porcelain for it.
Mhm.
Um, but it really did change. It made all the lines and shadows just so much stronger and richer.
Yeah, I love the shadows, the way that this works on it. I can imagine lighting this in like 10 different ways. It would just so change it. And again, this is one piece, right?
Yes. I made a whole series of them, but for some reason these two, and some of them I display as singles,
Hmm.
but these two just, I guess the way one fell into the other and the other,
Hmm.
they just um they spoke to each other. And it's a later piece also. It's much closer to the first piece of the two figures,
Hmm.
where I started getting more into relational work between.
So this particular piece, my guess is that you didn't create it as two pieces. You made two pieces, but then found that they work together.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
sometimes that does happen.
I often find, um, and I often make 2 or 3 pieces at the same time because it's the process, the coiling is so slow, you have to let it harden up. So I'll
Mhm.
work on one piece and I'll work on the other piece. And often within those groups of 2 or 3 pieces I'm working, there's a commonality
Mhm.
of being made at the same time, even though they're different shapes. And
Yeah.
yeah,
They're so light and airy. They almost look like they're made out of paper. I really enjoy them. So let's start at the beginning. I want to know how did you eventually become an artist? Like where your early years? What was it that was the light bulb?
Um, I certainly didn't come from a family that sort of valued being an artist, even though my mother painted, but I came from a very academic family.
Hmm.
So, university was the route, and I studied, believe it or not, philosophy and statistics.
Okay.
Worked in Statistics Canada. I'm from Montreal.
Mhm.
So, and then, but I kept taking pottery classes through the years and loved it.
Mhm.
And then I finally moved to Israel in 1975 and decided I'm going to do what I really love to do.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do
That
what's
was it. That was the
expected of
starting
me. That was the starting gun. Um, and I think even though my father was an academic, he loved what he did. And that was the role model. He was just passionate about his
gun.
work. So that I took from him. And I spent a year prepping a portfolio. I took drawing classes and I apprenticed with a potter in the old city of Jerusalem. And it was wonderful. I used to walk through the valley and into the gates, and I would meet all these artists. He was a very chatty potter. People would come and talk, artists from all over, and um, get to meet a lot of different people. And then I went to art school there.
Okay. All right. Was there one particular instructor that you had that really set you on your course, or was it a combination of everybody?
Um,
I
that's a
stumped you.
it was a very mixed experience. Yeah.
Okay.
It was uh very Bauhaus in its orientation.
Mhm.
I learned a lot technically, and I guess in some ways I learned a lot, but it was um no, I really can't say there was somebody there. There were
That's
people
fine.
along the way later that I worked with that I
Okay.
really like when I did workshops when I moved to Philadelphia that were much more impactful.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, Philly's great. So.
Oh, yeah, come on. I did
So
all
I
those
wanted.
workshops at the Clay Studio when they used to do tons of those workshops way back
Oh
in
yeah.
the
Yeah.
90s.
I love the Play Studio. They're fantastic. So tell me when you're in your studio, where do your ideas come from? In other words, what sparks that creativity? I'll give you an example. I've had artists tell me, "Oh, I need to take a walk first," or "I read literature," or "I do something else." Is there something that you do to get those creative juices going before you're in the studio?
Well, I'm a collector and I
Of
of little objects of nature.
okay.
And my studio, truthfully, is covered in shells and stones and leaves and little branches and in combination or stacked or making cairns or whatever it is. Um, but I often, weather permitting, start my day going for a walk. I'm
Okay.
a I'm a big walker. It's
Mhm.
my it's one of my blisses.
Mhm.
So and then I often write. I have a sort of creative journal, not a sketch pad, but I have a sketch pad too, but I just will write about what I'm thinking about or what I thought about on the walk in terms of what I want to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I usually have one or two different series going because my process is so slow.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I can work on this and then I put it away and I work on this. And often I'll work on the carved pieces from the solid and I'll work on a coil piece so that I can separate techniques that way. Um,
You mentioned sketchbook. Do you actually sketch out your stuff ahead of time, or is that
well,
completely opposite?
the way I do it is, let's say I find something I'm going to work on, and often it starts with a concept,
Uh-huh.
like like that series. Partially it was figure, but it was also you know, the way that the stone forms were affected by water and wind. Those,
Mhm.
the natural elements and the passage of time is often part of what I'm working with. So let's say, for example, now I have all these decaying leaves.
Mhm.
So, and it's the idea of a whole leaf looks one way, and
Mhm.
so many of them are similar, but when they start falling apart, they're unique. They become individual, like shards. I'm a big
Yeah.
collector stone shards. We were just in North Carolina on the beach a few weeks ago, and I was like picking up all these broken pieces, and my daughter-in-law is looking at me going, what? Like, can I have
Right. Yeah, they don't say it.
some-"
Right.
Yeah.
You're
So
the second artist this month who talked to me about decay of nature being an inspiration. And I
ah,
love that. It's like there's a theme running now. Now I have to have a double look when I start looking at these things.
I
So
have
you have a
those
studio.
pieces haven't come to fruition.
Mhm.
That's where I'm working on now, but it's the idea of the perfection and imperfection, and the idea of the elements speaking and how they become unique. You know, you can have two conch shells and they're exactly the same, but once they start aging, and it's like their life history
Yeah.
affects who they are.
Yeah.
So I will first sketch them just to figure out in a way what attracted me to it.
Mhm.
Then I'll do maquettes, small little solid maquettes, because then I don't have to worry about technically how to make sure that they won't explode in firing. So I'll just do these little ones to get a feel for it. Then
Mhm.
I'll do small pieces.
Mhm.
And then sometimes if I feel they need to, they'll
Mhm.
become bigger
Get
pieces or
larger.
part of a series if it really holds it for me.
With your process being slower, I guess that's the easiest way to put it. Do you ever get to a point? I mean, are you always fully committed to see a piece through, or have you ever found that, say, halfway through, you're like, nope, not working, and just start over?
Um, so that does happen. I don't usually chuck them right away. I'll wrap them up in plastic and keep
Uh-huh.
watering them like a plant, kind of, so
Hmm.
that there's still the possibility.
Okay. You mean you
And
don't put them outside to deteriorate?
no, no, I do remember at some point there were pieces that I smashed, finished pieces. I think from my beginning of like art school and way
Yeah.
back then, it was like, oh my gosh, nobody can see this piece.
Right.
And it was very powerful.
Uh-huh.
It was this sense of I created it. I
Yep.
decided no longer has, you know, a right to exist.
Right.
Uh, uh, but I found there was one piece, it was a huge piece, and therefore I couldn't quite throw it away. It was like hundreds and hundreds of hours of work, right? And I took it to a show in Chicago and I hadn't liked it. And all of a sudden, I turned it upside down and it was fabulous.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And it sold that day. It was amazing.
Upside down.
Upside down to a designer for some thing.
Fantastic.
And then it started a series which I called my dualities in perspective that I had a show at Muse. And it was all the pieces were created in the sense that they could be turned upside down and become something different. And
Hmm.
it all started with that piece that I was looking at it going, I can't put this. And then I just flipped it over and it went, oh my goodness.
You know that it's really funny. Earlier, I had mentioned Henry Moore, and do you know his piece on the Parkway, the three-way piece?
Mhm.
So he did the same thing. He made a sculpture and then he showed it in three different ways. So I understand that. It's like a new perspective. It's almost like it's not yours anymore, right? So it's like,
Right. Yes, exactly. And but it's also like when, you know, like when you look at something that's happened in your life and you go, if I look at it this way, it's this. And if I look
right.
at it this way, it's the philosophy, you know, major in there.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
works
I can see that. You know, I was going to ask if that had an impact, and clearly it has. So
it does conceptually, and you know, I did a minor in experimental psych,
yeah.
so and statistics. So I sort of try not to let my head get into it too much. But if I'm doing a series, I sort of variations on the theme. I get very analytic about it, and I
Mhm.
sort of have to consciously stop myself from doing that.
Do you find that since your process does take a little bit longer, that your process, when you go from series to series, does it remain constant? Is there a core process, or do you find that over the years it's changed, it's evolved?
You mean the technical process?
Yeah, how you approach it.
Um, well, I guess I've had these long series. I don't know if that's what you mean, where I've changed both the material, the technique,
Okay.
and often the idea. Like when I did the porcelain pieces that I threw and carved for a long, long time, and they also started by accident. I was taking a piece out of a kiln by the rim, and it wasn't fired yet, and it broke, and then I saved it, and it became a 10-year series. Um, but, and then it was just simply form. And
Mm-hmm.
then I took a break for about 4 or 5 months and walked Valley Green and photographed and sketched, and that's when I started my red nature-based, coil-based,
Okay.
moving away from the is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that helps me understand, because sometimes an artist will create a technique and they'll use that technique over time, but the ideas change, but they still use the same technique. But what I'm hearing is you're much more flexible.
I think so, but I think once I found the coil technique that I really liked, and the piece you showed, the sort of beehive kind of piece, was the beginning of that. And that coil technique, it evolved, but it was still using coils
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and using coils as a way of drawing because they became line.
That
And
makes
then
sense.
later with the nesting, they were coils as a tool as opposed to a line kind of thing.
Interesting. All right,
So
now I got to go back and relook at some of those pieces. So when you're in your studio, you're making a new piece, you know where you're going. What's going on in your head? Are you blanked out or are you super focused?
no, I'm super focused.
Are you? Okay.
I mean, but in a very sort of meditative way. That's why I love the coils. It's a very slow, organic, meditate. That and pinching. I just love that process. So when I'm working on the creative part of it, of the shaping of it, um, it's sort of I'm there but I'm not there. Like I have no sense of time.
Hmm.
My kid will knock on the door and say, "What's for dinner?" And I was like,
Right.
I was like, go ask your dad. He's the cook. But that when I get to the later stages, I do find, because I do a lot of scraping to define the lines and burnishing. Everything is deeply burnished for hours
Hmm.
and hours and hours. I never liked terracige, which made it easy to burnish. I always felt that over
Hmm.
time it would peel off often sometimes, but that's not true if you do it right. But I was never really very good at that. That was not my strength. So I just have a clay that burnishes well, and I have my little stone, and
Uh-huh.
I often listen to books on tape when I do that. It slows me down because
Uh-huh.
otherwise I'd be rushing, and this way
Yeah.
I can just do it really slowly and carefully.
I had this same conversation or same question with artists earlier this week. And I was joking that it's kind of like a highway hypnosis, like when you drive somewhere and then you can't remember driving through. Well,
Yeah,
sometimes artwork is like that. Like suddenly you have this piece and you're like, I don't even remember making this. Like it just
because you're
pops
just
and
in this
right.
fugue state.
Yes, exactly. How often are you in your studio?
Um, Recently, it's been a little bit of a drought, I think.
Mm.
Just things happening in my life. But when I'm in the flow, I'm usually there 5 days a week.
Nice. Did the pandemic throw that out of kilter or did it?
It did throw it out of kilter,
Mhm.
and you know, family issues also threw it out of kilter. So I'm really getting back to it. But I must admit, the fact that you chose some of my newest work, the stuff that I'm getting excited about now,
Mhm.
is sort of inspirational. Like I
I
want to
didn't
go
do that
and
on
do
purpose. I'm just choosing the work. I don't even look at dates when I choose work. I just look at the work itself. And artists are often surprised. Oh, wait, this is 20 years ago. I was like, yeah, just it still goes there.
It's
So
true.
speaking
They were, the first piece I think was 20 years ago.
20
The
years ago.
mine was 20 years ago, and the other one was maybe a year ago or so. So
So speaking of the work that you do, have you ever experimented with other mediums? Have you ever done photography, painting,
absolutely.
poetry, dance, anything like that?
Um, when I was teaching at the Outington Arts Center for many years, I used to get a free class a semester. So I did printmaking
Hmm. Okay.
for a long time. And what I loved about it was color, which
Uh-huh.
was the antithesis. It was in my white phase,
Hmm.
and the immediacy.
What kind of printmaking?
First I did collagraphs, which I
Okay.
really liked, and they were very organic. And then I started doing monoprints, which um, the immediacy of just painting it, printing it, having it was just the antithesis.
You must have
It
been
was
shocked.
it was such a lightness, there was this, but I got to the point where I would spend so much time in my studio painting the plates
Yeah.
and then going and doing the workshop stuff that I wasn't working in my studio for a period of time. Eventually I said, I think I have to go cold turkey on this because I just,
Uh,
and then I did stone carving. That was
okay.
which was like the antithesis of clay also because you're working, like I said earlier, from a solid. So I took a class at Grounds for Sculpture,
Okay.
and it was I love the place,
Yeah.
and there was an artist, and she gave a talk, and she was leading a workshop. So it was like 6 Saturdays, and you
Hmm.
got a piece of stone, and she was a really good teacher. I really enjoyed that. That was a lot
So
of
I know that the hot thing to do now is you make a website and you only have 10 things and they all look the same and that's what everybody kind of wants. But I would love to see some of those prints. I'd love to go through the files to see, for because as an artist, when I'm looking at your work, if I see prints added into the mix or color or whatnot, it makes you a much more rounded artist. You have a much bigger vocabulary kind of thing. So I would love to see that kind of stuff. So, you don't have to put them on your site, but maybe just, email me a few. That would be great.
Okay, I will do. I promise.
So we have time for just two more quick questions. One is I'm curious, are there other artists that you tend to be fascinated with, living or dead, or something that you maybe get inspiration?
Um, I listened to a couple of your talks, and you asked that question, so I was thinking about it. And Henry Moore is definitely one.
Who?
Um,
I'm sorry.
Henry Moore,
Oh, that's funny. Okay.
Barbara Hepworth,
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I can
and
see that. I can
yeah,
see the shapes. Uh-huh.
Jean Arp,
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and Brancusi.
See, now I need to see those prints even more. So I want to see that popping through. So we have time for final question.
Okay.
Question I ask everybody: what does making art do for you?
Yes, I did know you
You knew that was
that
coming. I know.
question. I wanted to think about that. That question is, what does it do for me? Um, it makes me happy. It makes me excited and curious. It also makes me very connected, centered,
Mhm,
peaceful in
mhm.
myself. It's my world, and that's that's it. That I
Yeah,
just
so it's almost like a personal therapy kind of a thing for a lot of artists, right?
yes, yeah, yeah,
It helps you make sense of the world. It grounds a lot of artists.
yes, yeah.
But
That's what I mean
but I
by
love the question because everybody answers it completely differently, but it's all like, there's a commonality to it. So well, I can't thank you enough for talking with me today. I
oh,
loved learning
thank
about your
you.
work. The idea of the figure in your work, now I need to go see a few more pieces and really see. I need to see them up front. So I want to thank you for coming by and talking to me today. I want to thank everybody else who tuned in to watch today. Of course, we love it if you like, share, and of course subscribe. That really helps push Art Show forward. But we want to thank you for tuning in today. And again, thank you for coming by today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.